The dust-choked wind swept through the ramshackle train station like a ghostly messenger, carrying whispers of broken promises as Emma Zeller clutched her tattered valise and the crumpled marriage contract that had brought her 2,000 miles from Boston to Redding, California in 1878. The telegram that had summoned her west with promises of a husband and a fresh start now felt like nothing more than a cruel joke as she stood alone on the platform. The last passenger disembarked, with no one to meet her and nowhere to go. Emma smoothed down her travel-worn dress, a once fashionable garment that now hung limply on her thin frame after the grueling journey. 22 years old and entirely alone in the world since her parents' passing last winter, she had answered an advertisement for a mail-order bride with hope and desperation in equal measure. Miss. Station's closing up for the night, the ticket master called, eyeing her with a mixture of impatience and pity. You waiting for someone? Yes, Emma lied, forcing a smile. I'm certain they'll arrive shortly. The man's skeptical expression told her he didn't believe her, neither did she. Your intended was Jeremiah Blackstone, correct? He asked, consulting a ledger. Afraid I've got some unfortunate news. Word came 3 days ago he was killed in a mining accident up near Sacramento. Telegram probably crossed paths with your journey. The ground seemed to shift beneath Emma's feet. Dead. The man she had never met but had planned to marry was dead, and she was stranded in a frontier town with barely $10 to her name and no prospects. I see, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for informing me. Town's got a boarding house for respectable women, the ticket master offered, scratching his gray-flecked beard. Might be able to stay there while you figure things out. Figure things out. What a delicate way of saying find another husband or starve. Emma nodded her thanks, gathered her few belongings, and stepped out into the dusty main street of Redding. The California town was larger than she'd expected, with wooden buildings lining both sides of the wide dirt road. Men in dusty clothes and weather-beaten hats moved purposefully about their business, barely sparing her a glance. A woman alone was a curiosity, but not enough to distract from the day's work. She had walked perhaps 50 yards when the sound of hoofbeats approached from behind. A wagon pulled alongside her, driven by a man whose face was shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Madam, he called, tipping his hat to reveal a sun-bronzed face with startlingly blue eyes. Don't mean to intrude, but you look a mite lost. New to Redding? Emma hesitated, weighing her options. Her mother had warned her about speaking to strange men, but her mother had never envisioned her in this predicament. Yes, she admitted. I've just arrived. Daniel Abernathy, he introduced himself with a slight nod. Most folks call me Dan. I run the Sunrise Ranch just outside town. Emma, she replied, then faltered. Just Emma. His eyebrows rose slightly. No surname, Miss Emma, she swallowed hard. I was to be married upon arrival. The gentleman was Jeremiah Blackstone, but I've just learned he's passed away. Daniel Abernathy's expression softened. Mail-order bride, Emma nodded, mortification heating her cheeks. It seems the mail failed to order me a living husband. To her surprise, a small smile quirked at the corner of his mouth. You've got spirit, Miss Emma No Name. That'll serve you well out here. He gestured toward the wagon seat beside him. Let me give you a ride to Mrs. Haversham's boarding house. It's getting on toward evening, and Redding ain't always kind to newcomers after dark. Emma hesitated. I wouldn't wish to impose. No imposition. I've got business with the general store right next door. Been meaning to place an order for some new fence posts. After a moment's deliberation, Emma accepted his help, allowing him to stow her valise and assist her onto the high wagon seat. Mrs. Haversham runs a tight establishment, Daniel explained as they rolled down the main street. No men allowed past the parlor, strict curfew, and her breakfast biscuits are hard enough to repair wagon wheels. But she's fair, and her rates won't clean out your purse too quick. Emma managed a small smile. You seem quite familiar with her establishment, Mr. Abernathy. He chuckled, the sound warm and unexpectedly pleasant. My sister stayed there when she first came west to join me, said it was like living in a convent run by a retired cavalry sergeant. The boarding house was a 2-story wooden structure painted a fading yellow, with white trim and a small, well-kept garden out front. As Daniel pulled the wagon to a stop, the front door opened to reveal a tall, stern-looking woman in a high-necked black dress. "Mr. Abernathy," she called, her voice carrying the hint of a southern accent. "What brings you to my establishment today?" Daniel helped Emma down from the wagon. "Mrs. Haversham, this young lady just arrived in town. She's in need of lodging." The woman's sharp eyes assessed Emma from head to toe. "I don't take in just anybody, Mr. Abernathy. I run a respectable house." "She's plenty respectable, madam," Daniel assured her. "Miss Emma here was to marry Jeremiah Blackstone, but arrived to find he's passed on." Mrs. Haversham's expression softened slightly. "The mining accident? Oh, you poor dear." She glanced at Emma's simple dress and small valise. "I suppose you haven't much in the way of funds." Emma straightened her spine. "I can pay for a week's lodging, Mrs. Haversham. After that, I intend to find employment." The older woman sniffed. "Employment for unmarried women is limited in Reading, miss." "Just Emma," she said quietly. Mrs. Haversham's eyebrows rose. "No surname." "I left my family name behind when I agreed to take on Mr. Blackstone's," Emma explained, the words sticking in her throat. "Now it seems I'm left with neither." Daniel cleared his throat. "Then take mine." Both women turned to stare at him. "I beg your pardon?" Emma asked, certain she'd misheard. Daniel shifted uncomfortably under their scrutiny. "Not as a wife," he clarified quickly, a flush creeping up his neck. "As a sister. My ranch needs help, and I've been looking to hire someone to cook and keep house. You need employment and a place to stay. We could tell folks you're my cousin, come to help after hearing of my sister's marriage." "Your sister married?" Mrs. Haversham asked suspiciously. "Last month. Moved to Sacramento with her husband," Daniel confirmed. "Left me with a house that looks like a tornado swept through it and meals that consist mainly of beans and coffee." Emma studied him carefully. "You would hire me without knowing if I can cook or clean," he shrugged. "Can you boil water without burning it?" "Of course." "Then you're already ahead of me." He smiled, the expression transforming his face from merely handsome to something that made Emma's heart skip a beat. "Look, Miss Emma, I'm offering honest work for fair pay. You'll have your own room in the house, and I've got a ranch hand who stays in the bunkhouse with his wife who can chaperone as needed." Mrs. Haversham made a disapproving sound. "A single woman living in a man's house." "Even with others present, her reputation would be preserved as my cousin," Daniel finished. "Miss Emma Abernathy, come to help family in need. Nothing improper about that." Emma considered the offer. A position as housekeeper was far better than the alternatives that might await a woman alone in a frontier town, and something about Daniel Abernathy's straightforward manner inspired trust. "When would you need me to start?" she asked. "You can stay here tonight," Daniel said. "Get a good night's rest. I'll come by tomorrow morning, and if you still want the position, I'll take you out to the ranch." Mrs. Haversham sighed heavily. "I suppose one night won't see me bankrupt. Come inside, Miss Abernathy. We'll get you settled." As Emma followed the boarding house proprietor inside, she glanced back at Daniel, who tipped his hat to her with a smile that seemed to promise more than just employment. Morning brought clear skies and a decision. Emma packed her meager belongings and paid Mrs. Haversham for her night's lodging, ignoring the woman's dire warnings about living under a bachelor's roof, cousin or no cousin. Daniel arrived precisely at 9 o'clock, driving a wagon loaded with supplies from the general store. He helped Emma with her valise, his manner courteous but not overly familiar. "Last chance to change your mind," he said as he assisted her onto the wagon seat. "I'm quite decided, Mr. Abernathy," he smiled. "If we're to be cousins, you'd best call me Daniel or Dan." "Very well, Daniel." The journey to Sunrise Ranch took nearly an hour, following a winding dirt road that gradually climbed into rolling hills covered with golden grass and dotted with oak trees. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures, and in the distance, Emma could see mountains rising blue against the horizon. "It's beautiful," she murmured. Daniel nodded, pride evident in his expression. 600 acres, not the biggest spread in these parts, but it's good land. My father started with just 50 acres and a dream 20 years ago, built it up little by little." A shadow crossed his face. "Lost him and mother to influenza 3 winters back. My sister Clara and I kept it going." "I'm sorry for your loss," Emma said quietly. "I lost my parents last winter, typhoid." They shared a moment of silent understanding, 2 people who knew the particular ache of becoming orphans as adults. "There it is," Daniel said eventually, pointing ahead to where a 2-story farmhouse stood surrounded by several outbuildings. Sunrise Ranch. The house was larger than Emma had expected, painted white with dark green shutters. A covered porch wrapped around the front, furnished with several rocking chairs. Flower beds, somewhat overgrown, lined the walkway to the front steps. "Clara's touch," Daniel explained, following her gaze to the flowers. "She always said a house needs something living and beautiful around it to feel like a home." As they approached, a man and woman emerged from one of the outbuildings. The man was tall and broad-shouldered with a shock of red hair, while the woman was petite with dark braids wrapped around her head. "That's Elijah and Maggie Cooper," Daniel said. "Elijah's my foreman, been with us since my father's time. Maggie helps with the heavier housework and laundry, comes up 3 times a week from their cabin near the creek." The couple approached as Daniel brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "Boss," Elijah greeted, then turned curious eyes to Emma. "This the cousin you telegraphed about?" Emma shot Daniel a surprised look. He'd already sent word about her. "Sent it this morning before I came to town," Daniel explained, reading her expression. "Wanted to make sure everything was ready." To Elijah, he said, "This is Emma Abernathy, my cousin from back east. Emma, Elijah, and Maggie Cooper." Maggie stepped forward with a warm smile. "Welcome to Sunrise, Miss Abernathy. It's good to have another woman about the place. Clara's departure left a mighty big hole." "Thank you," Emma said, returning the smile. "I hope I can fill at least part of it." "We've aired out the guest bedroom," Maggie continued. "It's across the hall from the master bedroom, but don't worry, Mr. Abernathy's a gentleman through and through." Emma felt heat rising in her cheeks at the implication. "I'm sure he is." Daniel cleared his throat. "Elijah, help me unload these supplies." "Maggie, would you mind showing Emma around the house?" The tour revealed a home that was fundamentally sound and well-built, but clearly suffering from a lack of feminine attention. Dust had accumulated on surfaces. The kitchen showed signs of bachelor cooking attempts, and the parlor had been transformed into what appeared to be a storage room for saddles, boots, and various ranching equipment. "Mr. Abernathy's been living in the kitchen and his bedroom since Clara left," Maggie explained, surveying the parlor with a shake of her head. "Says there's no point cleaning rooms nobody uses." "I see I have my work cut out for me," Emma observed. Maggie laughed. "That you do, Miss Abernathy. But you've got help. I come Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays for the heavy work. Just tell me where to start." By evening, Emma had organized the kitchen, prepared a simple but hearty meal of beef stew with the supplies Daniel had purchased in town, and begun to formulate a plan of attack for restoring order to the rest of the house. Daniel entered the kitchen just as she was setting the table, bringing with him the scent of leather, horses, and the outdoors. He'd clearly washed up, his dark hair still damp at the edges, face clean-shaven. "Something smells amazing," he said, inhaling deeply. "I'd almost forgotten what real cooking smells like. It's just a simple stew," Emma demurred, suddenly self-conscious about the meal. "After weeks of my own cooking, simple sounds like heaven." He pulled out a chair for her. "Please join me. I'm not one for standing on ceremony." They ate together, the conversation flowing more easily than Emma had expected. Daniel asked about her life in Boston, and she told him about growing up as the daughter of a bookkeeper, her education at a small ladies' academy, and her love of reading. "There are books in the study," Daniel mentioned. "My father was quite the reader. They're yours to borrow any time." "Thank you," Emma said, genuinely pleased. "What about you? Have you always been a rancher?" Daniel nodded. "Born to it." "My father came west during the gold rush of '49, but he was smart enough to see that feeding the miners would be more profitable than panning for gold himself. Started with a few cattle, then bought land when others gave up and headed home. I learned to ride before I could walk properly, according to my mother. And your sister, Clara," a fond smile crossed his face. "2 years younger than me, fierce as a mountain lion when riled, but with the biggest heart you'll ever find. She met her husband, Thomas, when he came through with a cattle drive last year. Love at first sight, I reckon." "You must miss her," Emma observed. Something like loneliness flashed across Daniel's face before he shrugged. "Family has to follow their own path sometimes," she writes weekly. After dinner, Daniel insisted on helping with the dishes, a courtesy Emma hadn't expected. As they worked side by side in the kitchen, she stealing glances at his profile when she thought he wasn't looking, Emma realized she felt more at ease in this stranger's home than she had anywhere since her parents' deaths. "I should warn you," Daniel said as they finished. "We'll have company for Sunday dinner tomorrow. Town tradition, the preacher visits outlying farms and ranches in rotation. Reverend Phillips and his wife will be here after services." Emma felt a flutter of panic. "I'm not prepared for guests." "The house is cleaner than it's been in a month, thanks to you," Daniel interrupted. "And Sarah Phillips is the least judgmental woman in the county. They'll be more interested in meeting you than inspecting the dusting." "Still, I should prepare something special," Emma insisted. "First impressions are important." Daniel studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Whatever you think best, budget's no concern for this." That night, lying in a strange bed in a strange house, Emma stared at the ceiling and contemplated the extraordinary turn her life had taken in just 24 hours. She had arrived in California expecting to become a wife, only to find herself a counterfeit cousin instead. Daniel Abernathy was unlike any man she had met before, straightforward yet considerate, strong without being intimidating. The arrangement was practical for both of them, she reminded herself sternly. Nothing more. But as sleep finally claimed her, Emma couldn't help wondering what might have happened if she had come west to marry someone like Daniel instead. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear. Emma rose early to begin preparations for dinner, starting with a peach pie made from the preserved fruit she found in the pantry. Daniel had already been out to check the cattle, returning as she was rolling out the pie crust. "You don't need to attend services if you're not up to meeting the whole town yet," he told her, pausing in the kitchen doorway. "I can make your excuses." Emma considered the offer. The thought of facing a church full of strangers, all curious about Daniel Abernathy's sudden cousin, was daunting, yet hiding away would only fuel gossip. "I'll go," she decided. "Better to face everyone directly." Daniel's approval was evident in his smile. "You'll do fine." Reading folks are generally decent people. They rode to town in the buggy, Emma wearing her best dress, a blue cotton with white trim that had seen better days but was still presentable. Daniel, in a clean shirt and his least worn denims, looked so handsome it was difficult not to stare. The small white church at the edge of town was already filling with families when they arrived. Daniel helped Emma down from the buggy, then offered his arm to escort her inside. The gesture, though innocent, felt oddly intimate. "Daniel Abernathy." A woman's voice called as they entered the church. "You're actually on time for once." A plump, friendly-faced woman in her 50s approached, her husband, obviously the preacher from his black coat and clerical collar, following at a more sedate pace. "Mrs. Phillips," Daniel greeted her with a warm smile. "Reverend, may I present my cousin, Emma Abernathy? She's come to help out at the ranch now that Clara's married." "How wonderful!" Sarah Phillips exclaimed, taking Emma's hands in hers. "We've been worried about Daniel rattling around that big house all alone. Welcome to Reading, my dear." "Thank you," Emma replied, immediately warming to the woman's genuine manner. Reverend Phillips nodded genially. "We look forward to getting better acquainted at dinner, Miss Abernathy. For now, perhaps you'd like to meet some of the congregation." The next half-hour passed in a blur of introductions. Emma met the town doctor and his wife, the blacksmith and his 7 children, the general store owner, and a dozen ranch families. Most were welcoming, though a few of the younger, unmarried women regarded her with thinly veiled suspicion. "Don't mind the Miller girls," Daniel murmured as they took their seats for the service. "They've been setting their caps for every unmarried man in the county for years, including you." Emma whispered back. A grimace crossed his face. "Especially me. Apparently, a ranch makes up for a face that's been weather-beaten since age 12. Emma found herself suppressing a laugh. "Your face is perfectly fine, Daniel." He glanced at her in surprise, and Emma immediately regretted the comment. It wasn't her place to remark on his appearance, cousin or not. The service itself was mercifully straightforward hymns Emma knew from her childhood church, a sermon on community and neighborly love, and finally, a benediction. Throughout, Emma was acutely aware of Daniel beside her, their shoulders occasionally brushing when they rose for hymns or prayers. After the service, several more people approached to welcome her to Reading. Most seemed to accept without question that she was Daniel's cousin, though Emma caught a knowing look from Mrs. Phillips that suggested the preacher's wife might harbor suspicions about her true identity. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in thought. Emma used the time to plan the final touches for dinner, while Daniel seemed preoccupied with the cattle they passed, commenting on their condition and the quality of the grazing. Dinner with the Phillipses proved more enjoyable than Emma had anticipated. Sarah Phillips brought a fresh baked loaf of bread to complement Emma's meal of roast chicken, potatoes, and green beans, while Reverend Phillips contributed a bottle of blackberry wine for special occasions. "This meal is a triumph, Miss Abernathy," the Reverend declared after his first few bites. "Daniel, you're a fortunate man to have such a talented cousin." "Don't I know it?" Daniel agreed, his eyes meeting Emma's across the table. Something in his gaze made her heart beat faster, and she quickly looked away. The conversation flowed easily, covering everything from local news to Emma's journey west, carefully edited to avoid mention of her mail-order bride status. Sarah Phillips proved to be a wellspring of information about Reading and its inhabitants, providing Emma with invaluable context for navigating her new community. "You must join our Ladies' Aid Society," Sarah insisted as they enjoyed pie and coffee. "We meet every Thursday afternoon. Nothing formal, just sewing and conversation, with proceeds going to help those in need." "That sounds lovely," Emma said sincerely, "though I'm not certain I can be spared from my duties here." Daniel waved off her concern. "Thursdays are fine. The ranch won't fall apart if you take an afternoon in town." After the Phillipses departed, promising to include Emma in their prayers for newcomers to the community, she and Daniel settled into a comfortable silence as they cleaned up the dinner dishes. "You made quite an impression," Daniel commented, drying a plate she handed him. "I haven't seen the Reverend eat third since last Thanksgiving." Emma smiled, pleased by the compliment. "They're very kind people. In fact, everyone I met today was welcoming." "Reading's a good community," Daniel agreed. "Most folks mind their own business and help when needed." He paused, then added, "Though I should warn you that Mrs. Phillips has likely already added you to her list of potential matches for the county's bachelors." Emma nearly dropped the dish she was washing. "But she thinks I'm your cousin, which makes you fair game for matchmaking in her book," Daniel explained with a chuckle. "She's married off half the county in her imagination." "I have no interest in being matched," Emma said firmly. The very thought of being paraded before potential husbands made her stomach clench. She'd had enough of matrimonial arrangements for the time being. Daniel studied her face for a moment. "Bad experience?" Emma hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "My journey here was not entirely voluntary. My parents' deaths left me with few options in Boston. When I saw the advertisement for a wife needed in California, it seemed like Providence." She gave a humorless laugh. "Until my intended bridegroom had the poor manners to die before I arrived." "His loss," Daniel said quietly. "My gain." The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with meaning neither seemed ready to explore. Emma busied herself with scrubbing an already clean pot, while Daniel carefully arranged the dried dishes in the cupboard. "I should check on the horses before turning in," he said eventually, breaking the silence. "Thank you for today, for everything." Left alone in the kitchen, Emma pressed her cool, damp hands to her flushed cheeks and reminded herself sternly that she was here as an employee, not a potential wife. Daniel Abernathy had been kind enough to offer her a position and a respectable identity when she most needed it. Developing romantic notions about her employer would be both foolish and inappropriate. The fact that his blue eyes and rare smile made her heart race was entirely beside the point. The next weeks settled into a rhythm as summer deepened across the California countryside. Emma threw herself into transforming the neglected farmhouse into a home again, while Daniel and his men tended the cattle and repaired fences damaged in the spring rains. Maggie Cooper proved an invaluable ally, teaching Emma the particulars of running a ranch household, everything from how to keep bread from molding in the summer heat to which local plants made the best remedies for common ailments. Together they tackled the parlor, restoring it to a comfortable gathering space rather than a storage room for ranching equipment. Mr. Abernathy's mother would turn in her grave if she could see what became of her parlor, Maggie commented, as they hung freshly laundered curtains. She was particular about her home. "What was she like?" Emma asked, curious about the woman who had helped build Sunrise Ranch. "Elizabeth Abernathy was a force of nature," Maggie said with obvious admiration. "Came west as a bride, turned a shack and 50 acres into this." She gestured around them. "Taught herself to shoot, ride, and doctor cattle alongside keeping a spotless house. Daniel has her eyes and her determination." Emma found herself spending more time than she should watching those blue eyes as Daniel went about his work. More concerning were the moments she caught him watching her in return, a thoughtful expression on his sun-bronzed face that made her wonder what he was thinking. Their evenings had developed a comfortable routine. After dinner, they often sat on the porch if the weather was fair, or in the newly reclaimed parlor if it wasn't, while Daniel taught Emma about ranching life. He seemed to enjoy explaining the cycles of the land, the care of cattle, and the challenges and rewards of the rancher's life. In turn, Emma read aloud from the books in his father's study, mostly history and adventure tales. With a few volumes of poetry she was surprised to discover Daniel enjoyed particularly. "My mother loved Wordsworth," he explained one evening as Emma finished reading. "I wandered lonely as a cloud." Said he understood how nature speaks to the soul. "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Emma observed. Daniel nodded, his expression softening with memory. "She was. Pa always said he married far above his station." A smile touched his lips. "She'd have liked you, I think." "You have the same practical approach to challenges." The compliment warmed Emma more than it should have. "I'm merely doing what needs doing." "Most folks just do what's easy," Daniel countered. "You tackle what's necessary, even when it's difficult." Their conversations often continued until the lamps burned low, ranging from childhood memories to dreams for the future. Emma found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone: her secret desire to travel, her love of thunderstorms, her habit of naming the characters in books after people she knew. Daniel proved to be a surprisingly good listener, a trait Emma hadn't expected in a man who spent most of his days giving orders to ranch hands and cattle. He asked thoughtful questions and remembered details from previous conversations, referencing them days later in a way that showed he truly paid attention. It was becoming increasingly difficult to remember that their relationship was meant to be purely professional. 3 weeks after Emma's arrival at Sunrise Ranch, a letter came from Clara, Daniel's sister. Emma recognized the handwriting on the envelope immediately, having sorted through previous correspondence while organizing the study. Daniel opened it at breakfast, his expression growing increasingly amused as he read. "Clara sends her regards," he said, folding the letter and tucking it into his shirt pocket. "She's heard about my cousin from Mrs. Phillips, who apparently wrote to share the good news that I'm no longer living like a hermit." Emma felt a twinge of guilt. "Does she know the truth?" Daniel nodded. "Clara and I don't keep secrets. She approves of the arrangement but warns that I'd better be treating you with proper respect or she'll come back and tan my hide." His eyes crinkled with amusement. "Her words, not mine." "And are you," Emma asked before she could stop herself, "treating me with proper respect?" Something shifted in Daniel's expression, the humor replaced by an intensity that made her breath catch. "I hope so. If I've ever made you uncomfortable—" "No," Emma interrupted quickly. "You've been a perfect gentleman." "Almost too perfect," a traitorous voice whispered in her mind. The thought shocked her. What did she expect? That he would court his housekeeper, make romantic overtures to a woman who was supposedly his cousin as far as the town knew. "Clara also writes that she and Thomas will be visiting next month," Daniel continued, mercifully unaware of Emma's inappropriate thoughts. "She's eager to meet you." The prospect of meeting Daniel's sister, the woman whose role Emma had essentially taken over, was daunting. "I hope she'll approve of the changes to the house." "Clara's not the type to criticize," Daniel assured her. "Besides, the place looks better than it has in years. You've worked wonders." The following day brought a summer thunderstorm, the kind that turned the world dark at midday and sent cattle seeking shelter under trees. Daniel and the men returned to the house soaked to the skin, having spent the morning moving a herd to higher ground away from a creek that threatened to flood. Emma met them with towels and hot coffee, directing the ranch hands to the bunkhouse where Maggie had prepared a hearty stew. Daniel remained behind, accepting a towel with grateful hands. "You're soaked through," Emma chided, noting how his shirt clung to his broad shoulders. "You should change before you catch your death." "Yes, madam," he replied with a mock salute, but his teasing smile faded as a violent shiver ran through him. Emma frowned, reaching up without thinking to press her palm to his forehead. "You're burning up." Daniel tried to brush off her concern. "Just need to dry off. Been wet before." "Daniel Abernathy, you have a fever. Upstairs now." To her surprise, he complied without further argument, which only confirmed her suspicion that he was genuinely unwell. Emma followed him up the stairs, noting with concern that his usually energetic stride was labored. In his bedroom, a space Emma had cleaned but otherwise avoided, she turned down the bed while Daniel disappeared behind a folding screen to change into dry clothes. When he emerged in a nightshirt, his face was alarmingly pale beneath his tan. "Into bed," Emma ordered, her worry overriding any awkwardness about being in his private space. "I'll bring up some broth and willow bark tea." Daniel sank onto the edge of the bed. "Don't fuss, Emma. Probably just a chill." "Men," she muttered, helping him swing his legs under the covers. "Always dismissing illness until you're half dead. My father was the same." A ghost of a smile crossed Daniel's face. "My mother used to say the same thing about my father." Emma bustled about the room, building up the fire to ward off the damp chill, then hurried downstairs to prepare the remedies Maggie had taught her for fever and aches. When she returned with a tray, Daniel was lying with his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. "Daniel," she called softly, setting the tray on the bedside table. His eyes fluttered open, fever bright but still lucid. "Still here, just resting." "Good, you need to drink this." She helped him sit up enough to sip the bitter willow bark tea, supporting his shoulders with one arm. The position brought their faces close together, and Emma was struck by the vulnerability in his expression. "Tastes awful," he complained after swallowing. "Medicine usually does," she replied practically. "The broth is better." After ensuring he'd consumed both the tea and most of the broth, Emma helped Daniel lie back against the pillows. As she adjusted the blankets around him, his hand caught hers, surprisingly strong despite his illness. "Thank you," he said, his blue eyes intense, "for taking care of me." Emma felt herself blushing under his gaze. "It's what anyone would do." "No," Daniel said softly. "It's what you do, care for others, make things better." His thumb traced a small circle on the back of her hand, sending an unexpected shiver up her arm. "You've made Sunrise feel like home again." Before Emma could respond, his eyes drifted closed, his hand relaxing its grip as sleep claimed him. She gently disentangled her fingers from his, trying to ignore the lingering warmth of his touch. Daniel's fever worsened through the night. Emma took turns with Maggie, who stayed to help, applying cool compresses to his forehead and neck while he tossed restlessly, occasionally mumbling incoherently. By morning, Emma was exhausted but determined not to leave his side. "You need rest too," Maggie insisted, bringing fresh water for the compresses. "You'll be no good to him if you collapse." "Just a little longer," Emma pleaded. "His fever seems to be breaking." Indeed, Daniel's skin felt cooler to the touch and his breathing had steadied. As if to confirm her assessment, his eyes opened, clearer than they had been the previous evening. "Emma," he murmured, his voice raspy. "I'm here," she assured him, relief washing through her. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by the entire herd," he admitted with a weak smile. "But better than yesterday." Maggie approached the bed, laying her hand on Daniel's forehead. "Fever's broken," she confirmed. "You'll live, Mr. Abernathy, though you gave us a scare." "Sorry to be a bother," he said, attempting to sit up. "Don't you dare," Emma ordered, gently pressing him back against the pillows. "You need rest. The ranch won't fall apart if you take one day to recover." A ghost of his usual smile crossed Daniel's face. "Using my own words against me." "If they're sensible words, yes," Emma retorted, unable to suppress her own smile. Maggie watched this exchange with a knowing expression that Emma studiously ignored. "I'll bring up some breakfast," the older woman said. "Something light for our patient." When they were alone again, Daniel caught Emma's hand just as she was adjusting his pillows. "You stayed all night," he said, his tone making it a question. Emma nodded, suddenly self-conscious. "Your fever was high. I was worried." "Thank you," he said simply, his blue eyes holding hers. "I don't remember much, but I know you were here." Something in his gaze made Emma's heart flutter in a way that had nothing to do with exhaustion. "Where else would I be?" she asked softly. Neither spoke for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Finally, Emma gently withdrew her hand. "You should rest, doctor's orders." "You're not a doctor," Daniel pointed out, but he settled back against the pillows. "No, but I'm the closest thing you have at the moment, so you'd best listen to me." His smile was warm. "Yes, madam." Daniel recovered quickly, though Emma insisted he take it easy for several days afterward. He chafed at the restriction, accustomed to being active from dawn until dusk, but surprisingly followed her directions with minimal grumbling. "You're a better patient than I expected," Emma commented on the third day, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the hills in gold and crimson. "My mother taught me to recognize when I'm outmatched," Daniel replied, his eyes twinkling. "Besides, it's not so bad being fussed over by a pretty woman." The casual compliment sent warmth spreading through Emma's chest. "I'm hardly fussing, just ensuring you don't suffer a relapse through sheer stubbornness." Daniel laughed, the sound warming her even more than his words had. "Is that what you call forbidding me to so much as look at a horse for 3 days? Practical medical advice." "Precisely," Emma said primly, then ruined the effect by laughing herself. "Perhaps I've been a bit overprotective." "Perhaps," Daniel agreed mildly. "But it's nice having someone care enough to worry." The simple statement hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither seemed ready to acknowledge directly. Emma busied herself with her mending while Daniel gazed out at the darkening landscape, apparently lost in thought. "I've been thinking," he said eventually, "about our arrangement." Emma's hand stilled a flutter of anxiety in her stomach. "Oh, it's working well, don't you think? You seem comfortable here." "Very," Emma agreed cautiously, unsure where he was leading. Daniel turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. "I'd like to make it permanent. Your position here, I mean." "Permanent?" Emma echoed, her heart beating faster. "As your housekeeper." "As whatever role suits you," Daniel said, suddenly seeming uncertain. "I know this wasn't what you came west for. You expected to be a wife, to have your own home. Instead, you're keeping house for a bachelor rancher under a false identity." "Daniel," Emma began, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish, please. I've never been good with words, but this needs saying." He took a deep breath. "You deserve more than being someone's employee, Emma. You deserve a real place here if you want it, a home that's truly yours." Emma stared at him, hardly daring to interpret his meaning. "What exactly are you proposing, Daniel?" He met her gaze steadily. "Nothing yet. Just opening the door to possibilities, letting you know that I've come to value you as more than a housekeeper, more than a pretend cousin." His voice softened. "Much more." Before Emma could respond, the sound of hoofbeats approaching interrupted the moment. Daniel rose to his feet, peering into the gathering dusk. "Expecting someone?" Emma asked, both relieved and disappointed by the interruption. Daniel shook his head, his posture suddenly alert. No, stay here. He stepped off the porch just as a rider came into view, a man on a lathered horse, riding hard toward the house. As he drew closer, Emma recognized Elijah Cooper, returning from a supply run to town. "Boss," Elijah called, reining in his mount. "Trouble coming." Daniel strode to meet him. "What kind of trouble?" Man in town asking questions about a mail-order bride who never arrived. Jeremiah Blackstone's brother claims his brother wasn't dead at all, just delayed. Says the bride was already paid for and he wants her or the money back. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. She gripped the porch railing for support, her knees suddenly weak. Daniel's voice carried clearly in the evening air. "What's he look like?" "Mean," Elijah said bluntly. "Got the look of a man who enjoys other folks suffering. Wearing fancy clothes but dirty underneath, if you take my meaning. Carrying a pistol on his hip like he knows how to use it." "Did you speak to him?" Daniel asked, his voice tight. Elijah shook his head. "No, but I heard him questioning folks at the saloon. Someone mentioned a new woman out at Sunrise Ranch. He seemed mighty interested in that." Daniel was silent for a moment, his face unreadable in the gathering darkness. "How long ago was this?" 2 hours. I rode straight here after hearing it." "Good man." Daniel clapped Elijah on the shoulder. "Take care of your horse, then come to the house. We need to talk." As Elijah led his exhausted mount toward the stables, Daniel returned to the porch. One look at Emma's face told him she'd heard everything. "He's coming for me, isn't he?" she whispered. Daniel took her cold hands in his warm ones. "Not if I have anything to say about it. Come inside, Emma. We need to make plans." In the kitchen, Emma moved mechanically, preparing coffee while Daniel paced the floor, his expression dark with concentration. When Elijah joined them, the three sat at the table to assess the situation. "What exactly does this man want?" Daniel asked Emma gently. She twisted her hands in her lap. "I don't know. The contract was with Jeremiah Blackstone. I was to be his wife in exchange for my passage west and a home, if he truly isn't dead." "Something doesn't add up," Daniel interrupted, shaking his head. "Why would the brother come looking instead of Jeremiah himself? And why now, nearly a month after you arrived?" "Could be a scam," Elijah suggested. "Might not be Blackstone's brother at all. Just someone who heard about a mail-order bride left stranded and figured he could profit somehow." Daniel nodded slowly. "That seems more likely. Either way, his intentions can't be honorable." He turned to Emma, his expression gentle but determined. "You don't have to face this man. We can send you to stay with Clara in Sacramento until we sort this out." Emma straightened her spine, finding her courage. "No, I won't run away. This is my home now, and I won't be chased from it by some confidence man or fortune hunter." The pride in Daniel's eyes at her declaration made her heart swell. "All right then, we stand our ground. But we need a better story than you being my cousin. If this man has been asking questions in town, someone might have mentioned the resemblance to our cousin Tale." Elijah cleared his throat. "Begging your pardon, but there's an obvious solution." When both turned to look at him, he continued, "If Miss Emma were actually Mrs. Abernathy, no mail-order bride contract would hold water. A married woman can't be claimed by another man." The suggestion hung in the air, laden with implications. Emma felt heat rush to her face, unable to look at Daniel. "A marriage of convenience," Daniel said slowly, "just on paper to protect Emma's freedom." "It would need to be convincing," Elijah pointed out. "This fella sounds like the type to dig for weaknesses." Daniel's eyes found Emma's across the table. "It would be your choice, Emma. Completely your choice." Emma considered the options. Running away would mean leaving behind the home and life she'd begun to build and the man she'd begun to love. though she'd barely admitted that even to herself. Staying as she was left her vulnerable to whatever scheme this alleged Blackstone brother had concocted. Or she could become Mrs. Daniel Abernathy, even if only in name. How soon could it be arranged? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Reverend Phillips could perform the ceremony tomorrow, Daniel said. We'd need witnesses Elijah and Maggie would serve. And the town, would they believe a sudden marriage? Daniel's lips quirked in a half-smile. Half the gossips in Reading already think there's more between us than a family connection. Mrs. Phillips has been dropping hints about how convenient it is that my cousin is no blood relation at all. Despite the gravity of the situation, Emma felt a laugh bubble up. She's been doing the same to me, mentioning how a ranch needs both a man's strength and a woman's touch to truly thrive. Smart woman, Elijah commented. Saw what was happening before you two did. Emma glanced sharply at the foreman, who merely raised an eyebrow in response. Had her feelings for Daniel been so obvious to everyone but herself? It would be a real marriage in the eyes of the law and the church, Daniel said, his tone serious again. But between us, it could be whatever we choose to make it. No expectations, no obligations. The delicate pause told Emma exactly which marital obligations he was referring to. The thought sent a flutter through her that was equal parts nervousness and something far less innocent. I understand, she said, hoping her voice didn't betray her confusion of emotions. I accept your proposal, Daniel, such as it is. Something flickered in his eyes, disappointment. Relief. Emma couldn't tell. Then it's decided. I'll ride into town at first light to speak with Reverend Phillips and obtain a license. Elijah, you'll stay here with Emma. No one comes near the house without my explicit permission. Yes, boss, Elijah agreed. Maggie and I will stay in the house tonight just to be safe. After Elijah departed to inform his wife of the plan, Emma and Daniel were left alone in the kitchen, the weight of their decision settling between them. Are you certain about this? Daniel asked quietly. Marrying me, even in name only, is a significant commitment. Emma met his gaze steadily. More certain than I was about marrying Jeremiah Blackstone, a man I'd never met. She hesitated, then added softly, At least with you, I know the kind of man I'm getting. Daniel's expression softened. And what kind is that? A good one, Emma said simply. The best I've known. The intensity in Daniel's eyes made her breath catch. For a moment, she thought he might close the distance between them, but instead he stepped back, running a hand through his hair. We should get some rest, he said, his voice rougher than usual. Tomorrow will be eventful. Emma nodded, suddenly exhausted by the emotional turmoil of the evening. Good night, Daniel. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Emma reflected on the bizarre twist her life had taken. She had come to California to marry a stranger, only to find herself about to marry a different man, one who had somehow, in the span of a month, become the most important person in her world. A marriage of convenience, Daniel had called it. Emma wondered if he realized that her feelings for him had long since passed the boundaries of convenience and ventured into territory far more dangerous to her heart. Morning brought clear skies and renewed determination. Emma rose early, washing her face with cold water to banish the traces of a largely sleepless night. In her wardrobe hung the one good dress she had brought west, a dove-gray silk with delicate pearl buttons that had been her mother's. She had planned to wear it for her wedding to Jeremiah Blackstone. Now it would serve for a different ceremony altogether. Daniel had already departed for town when Emma descended to the kitchen, where Maggie was preparing breakfast. Mr. Abernathy left at dawn, Maggie informed her, setting a cup of coffee at Emma's place. Said to tell you he'd be back by noon with the license and Reverend Phillips. She hesitated, then added, He also said to tell you that you can still change your mind. Emma shook her head. My mind is quite decided. Maggie studied her face for a moment, then nodded approvingly. Good. You two belong together, whatever circumstances pushed you to it. She turned back to the stove. Now eat something. Can't have you fainting at your own wedding. The morning passed in a blur of activity. Maggie insisted on making the house presentable for the ceremony, while Emma gathered wildflowers from the garden to make a simple bouquet. By the time the clock struck 11, everything was ready except the bride herself. Upstairs, Emma changed into her mother's dress with Maggie's assistance, then sat at the dressing table while the older woman arranged her hair. Something's troubling you beyond the obvious, Maggie observed as she pinned up a golden curl. Want to talk about it? Emma met her eyes in the mirror. What if this is all Daniel feels obligated to do? What if he resents being forced into marriage, even one in name only? Maggie's hand stilled. Miss Emma, I've known Daniel Abernathy since he was a boy with skinned knees and big dreams. That man doesn't do anything he doesn't want to do. Her expression softened. And the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. Trust me, obligation has nothing to do with it. Before Emma could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention to the window. Daniel had returned with Reverend Phillips and, to Emma's surprise, Mrs. Phillips as well. Your groom is here, Maggie announced with a smile. Ready? Emma took a deep breath, smoothing the silk of her dress. Ready. Downstairs, Daniel was pacing the parlor when Emma entered. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and the expression that crossed his face stole her breath. Wonder, admiration, and something deeper transformed his features as he stared at her. Emma, he breathed, the single word conveying more than 1,000 might have. She smiled, suddenly shy. Hello, Daniel. He crossed to her in 3 long strides, taking her hands in his. You look beautiful, he said quietly for her ears alone. Like a dream. A dream wedding, Emma asked, aiming for lightness despite the flutter in her chest. Hardly the circumstances most brides hope for. Daniel's expression grew serious. I know this isn't what you planned, but I promise to be a husband you won't regret accepting, even if the choice wasn't entirely free. Before Emma could respond, Mrs. Phillips bustled into the room, exclaiming over Emma's appearance and the flowers decorating the mantel. The older woman's enthusiasm provided a welcome distraction from the intensity of the moment. The ceremony itself was brief, but surprisingly moving. Reverend Phillips spoke of partnership and mutual support, of building a life together on the foundation of respect and care. Standing before him with Daniel's warm hand holding hers, Emma found herself blinking back unexpected tears. Do you, Daniel James Abernathy, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? The Reverend asked. Daniel's blue eyes held Emma's steadily. I do. And do you, Emma? The Reverend paused, then smiled gently. It seems I don't have your full name, my dear. Emma hesitated only a moment. Just Emma. Emma Abernathy now, I suppose. Something flickered in Daniel's eyes, surprise, followed by a warmth that made her heart skip. Do you, Emma, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, she said clearly, meaning it more than anyone in the room could know. Then by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Reverend Phillips smiled. You may kiss your bride, Daniel. For a moment, Emma thought Daniel might simply bow or kiss her cheek, a gesture suitable for their supposed arrangement. Instead, he stepped closer, one hand gently cupping her face as he lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, almost hesitant at first, but as Emma responded, her hands finding his shoulders for support, it deepened into something neither had anticipated. When they finally parted, both were breathing unevenly, staring at each other in wonder and confusion. The sound of Mrs. Phillips dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief broke the spell. "So beautiful," the older woman sniffled. "I always cry at weddings." After a simple celebration lunch, during which Mrs. Phillips regaled them with stories of other hasty marriages that had stood the test of time. Sometimes, when you just know. The Phillipses departed with promises to announce the happy news to the congregation on Sunday. "That should take care of any questions about your status," Reverend Phillips said, shaking Daniel's hand firmly. "If this Blackstone character comes around, he'll find no support in Reading for his claims." "Thank you, Reverend," Daniel replied, "for everything." When they were finally alone, an awkward silence fell between the newly married couple. Emma busied herself clearing the lunch dishes, while Daniel stood by the window, watching the Phillipses' buggy disappear down the road. "So," he said eventually, turning to face her. "So," Emma echoed, setting down the plate she'd been drying. "We're married." Daniel nodded, his expression unreadable. "We are, legally and properly, Mrs. and Mr. Abernathy." "What happens now?" Emma asked, voicing the question that had been circling in her mind since their decision the previous evening. Daniel approached slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. "Now we continue as we have been, if that's what you want. You have my name and my protection. Nothing else needs to change." Emma studied his face, searching for some hint of his true feelings. The kiss they'd shared during the ceremony had felt like more than a perfunctory sealing of vows, but perhaps that had been for the benefit of their witnesses. "And if I wanted things to change?" she asked softly, gathering her courage. "If I wanted this to be more than a marriage of convenience?" Daniel went very still, his blue eyes darkening. "What are you saying, Emma?" She took a step closer, her heart pounding. "I'm saying that I didn't marry you just to escape a man claiming to be Jeremiah Blackstone's brother. I married you because I've come to care for you, deeply." For a terrible moment, Daniel didn't respond, and Emma feared she'd misread everything. Then he closed the distance between them, taking her face in his hands with infinite tenderness. "I've been falling in love with you since the day you stood on that train platform with your chin up and your eyes full of determination," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "Every day since has only made me love you more." Emma's breath caught. "You love me, with everything I am," Daniel affirmed. "I wanted to court you properly, to give you time to be sure of your feelings. The threat of Blackstone's brother forced my hand, but I can't pretend I'm sorry to call you my wife." Joy bubbled up inside Emma, spilling over in a radiant smile. "I'm not sorry either." This time when Daniel kissed her, there was no hesitation, no audience to perform for just the pure, honest expression of feelings too long constrained. Emma wound her arms around his neck, returning his passion with her own, finally allowing herself to acknowledge the depth of her feelings. When they eventually parted, both breathless, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "I should warn you," he murmured, "I have no intention of sleeping in separate bedrooms unless that's what you truly want." A blush heated Emma's cheeks, but she met his gaze steadily. "I don't want that at all." Daniel's slow smile made her heart race. "Good," he said simply, before capturing her lips again in a kiss that promised everything words could not express. 3 days later, a stranger rode onto Sunrise Ranch, a well-dressed man with cold eyes and an insincere smile who introduced himself as Victor Blackstone. Daniel met him in the yard, standing tall and unyielding as the man explained his purpose. "I understand you're harboring a young woman who was contracted to marry my late brother," Victor said, his tone falsely cordial. "I've come to collect her, as is my right. The agreement was paid for in full." "You're mistaken," Daniel replied calmly. "There's no unmarried woman here." Victor's smile tightened. Don't play games with me, Abernathy. The ticket master in Reading confirmed a woman matching her description arrived last month, intended for Jeremiah. When my brother's unfortunate accident prevented their union, she apparently found shelter here. She found more than shelter, Daniel corrected. She found a husband. My wife, Emma Abernathy, has no obligation to you or your brother's memory. Victor's facade of politeness slipped, revealing the coldness beneath. A convenient arrangement. But contracts don't dissolve because a woman decides to marry elsewhere. The bride or the money, Abernathy, those are your options. Here's a third option, came Emma's voice from the porch. She stepped forward to stand beside Daniel, her head high. You leave our property immediately and never return. Victor's eyes narrowed as he studied her. So you're the one. Pretty enough, I suppose. My brother had simple tastes. Daniel's hand moved to rest at the small of Emma's back, a gesture both protective and supportive. My wife has made her position clear, Mr. Blackstone. I suggest you respect it. Wife, Victor sneered. A hastily arranged ceremony doesn't negate prior claims. I have documents, which a court would find highly questionable, given that your brother is supposedly deceased, Daniel interrupted. Not to mention the curious timing of your appearance, weeks after the fact. Victor's hand drifted toward his hip, where a pistol rested in a tooled leather holster. I don't need courts to settle my affairs. Before he could make another move, the distinct sound of a rifle being cocked came from the direction of the bunkhouse. Elijah Cooper stood in the doorway, weapon raised. That's far enough, Daniel said quietly. You're outnumbered, Blackstone, and unwelcome. Leave now, peacefully, or the sheriff will be dragging what's left of you out of here. For a tense moment, Victor seemed to consider his options. Then, with deliberate slowness, he moved his hand away from his weapon. This isn't over, he warned. A woman who breaks contracts isn't worth the trouble, but the principle matters. The only principle that matters is that Emma is my lawfully wedded wife, Daniel stated firmly. Whatever arrangement might have existed before died with your brother if he was ever alive at all. Victor's face darkened with anger, but he reined in his temper visibly. We'll see, he said, turning his horse. We'll see. They watched in silence as he rode away, maintaining their vigilant stance until he was out of sight. You think he'll be back? Emma asked, leaning into Daniel's side. Daniel shook his head. Men like that are cowards at heart. He was looking for easy money or a vulnerable woman. He found neither. He turned to face her fully, his expression softening. Are you all right? Emma nodded, drawing strength from his presence. I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. It feels good to stand up for myself, for ourselves. Daniel smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. That's my brave wife. The word still sent a thrill through Emma. Wife. After a lifetime of being daughter, then orphan, then mail-order bride, she had found an identity that felt right. Not just any wife, but Daniel Abernathy's wife, chosen and cherished. True to Daniel's prediction, Victor Blackstone did not return. Whether deterred by the show of strength or simply moving on to easier targets, he vanished from Reading as suddenly as he had appeared. Life at Sunrise Ranch settled into a new rhythm. Emma continued her transformation of the house, now with the full authority of mistress rather than housekeeper. Daniel consulted her on ranch decisions, valuing her practical mind and fresh perspective. Together, they began planning expansions to the cattle operation and improvements to the house. Their nights were spent learning each other, the initial awkwardness of newlyweds quickly giving way to a deepening passion that surprised and delighted them both. Emma discovered that Daniel's careful control extended to lovemaking patient, attentive, and utterly focused on her pleasure before his own. In turn, she reveled in her ability to make him forget that control entirely. his restraint crumbling under her increasingly confident touch. "I never imagined marriage could be like this," Emma confessed one evening as they lay tangled together in the afterglow of their lovemaking. "So equal, so partnered." Daniel traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "My parents set the example. My father used to say my mother was the best business decision he ever made." He smiled at the memory. She'd swat him for saying it, but then she'd kiss him and agree that he wasn't a bad investment either. Emma laughed, snuggling closer to his warmth. "I like that. A mutual investment in each other, with substantial returns," Daniel murmured against her hair. "Every day with you makes me richer." Emma Abernathy. As autumn painted the California landscape in gold and russet, Clara and her husband Thomas arrived for their promised visit. Emma had fretted about meeting Daniel's sister, worried that Clara might see her as an opportunist who had taken advantage of her brother's kindness. Her fears proved groundless. Clara Abernathy Wells was a female version of her brother, straightforward, warm-hearted, and possessed of the same startlingly blue eyes. She embraced Emma without hesitation upon arrival. "So you're the one who's finally made my stubborn brother happy," Clara declared, holding Emma at arm's length to study her. "I knew the moment I read his first letter about you that something was different. He used to write about cattle prices and rainfall. Suddenly, he was describing the way sunlight caught in someone's hair." Emma blushed, glancing at Daniel, who looked both embarrassed and pleased by his sister's revelation. "Your brother rescued me when I had nowhere else to turn," she said simply. "I'm the fortunate one." Clara's knowing smile suggested she saw far more than Emma's words revealed. From what I can see, the fortune runs both ways." She linked her arm through Emma's. "Now, show me what you've done with the house. Daniel writes that you've worked miracles." The visit cemented the bonds of family, with Clara treating Emma as the sister she'd never had. The two women formed an immediate connection, sharing stories of their childhoods and their experiences adapting to ranch life. Thomas, Clara's husband, proved to be a genial, practical man who clearly adored his wife and got along famously with Daniel. On their last evening together, as the men discussed a potential cattle drive planned for the following spring, Clara drew Emma aside onto the porch. "I've never seen my brother so content," she said quietly, watching Daniel through the window as he laughed at something Thomas said. "Growing up, he always carried the weight of responsibility so heavily, first for our parents, then for me, then for the ranch itself. You've lightened that burden somehow." Emma smiled, her eyes finding her husband's profile. "He does the same for me. Before Daniel, I was always someone's daughter or someone's intended, never just me. He sees me the real Emma." Clara squeezed her hand. "That's love, sister. The real kind, not the fleeting fancy that passes for it in novels." She hesitated, then added, "Daniel wrote me about how you came to be married. Started as convenience, he said." "It did," Emma acknowledged, "but it became so much more so quickly." "The best marriages often do," Clara said wisely. "Passion fades or grows depending on what foundation it's built upon. Yours has the right foundation: respect, friendship, and genuine caring." She smiled. "Plus, you're clearly mad for each other. The way you two look at one another when you think no one's watching. Well, it's almost indecent." Emma laughed, her cheeks warming. "Clara, just stating facts," the other woman replied with an unrepentant grin. "Be happy, Emma, you both deserve it." Winter descended on Sunrise Ranch with a gentleness unusual for the mountains, bringing cool rains rather than harsh snows. The cattle fared well, and Daniel's careful management ensured ample feed stores for the season. Inside the warm house, Emma created a haven of comfort, with hearty meals, cheerful fires, and the quiet companionship that had become the bedrock of their marriage. As Christmas approached, Emma found herself increasingly unwell in the mornings, a suspicion forming that she confirmed with a discreet visit to the doctor during a trip to town. She kept the news to herself, planning to tell Daniel on Christmas morning as a special gift. The holiday itself dawned clear and cold, with a dusting of rare snow transforming Sunrise Ranch into a winter wonderland. Daniel surprised Emma with a beautiful writing desk for the parlor, crafted by the town's carpenter to replace the battered table she'd been using for correspondence. "It's perfect," she exclaimed, running her hands over the smooth oak surface. "I've never had anything so fine." "You deserve fine things," Daniel said simply, clearly pleased by her reaction. "There's a matching bookcase coming in the spring." Emma's gift to Daniel was a handcrafted quilt she had been working on in secret for months. Pieced together from scraps of meaningful fabrics, a bit of the dress she'd worn on their wedding day, a square from one of his old shirts too worn to mend, a fragment of Clara's childhood blanket the other woman had contributed to the project. "Every piece tells part of our story," Emma explained as Daniel examined the intricate stitching with wonder. "I wanted to make something that would keep you warm and remind you of all we've built together." Daniel's eyes were suspiciously bright as he pulled her into his arms. "It's the most thoughtful gift I've ever received," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you, my love." Emma nestled against his chest, gathering courage for her final revelation. "I have one more gift," she said softly, "though it won't arrive until summer." Daniel pulled back slightly to look at her face, confusion giving way to dawning realization as she placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Emma," he whispered, hope and disbelief mingling in his voice. "Are you saying?" She nodded, tears of joy filling her eyes. "We're going to have a baby, Daniel. Our baby." The wonder that transformed his face was something Emma knew she would remember until her dying day. Without warning, Daniel lifted her and spun her around, his laughter joining with hers in the warm parlor. "A baby," he repeated, setting her carefully on her feet. "Our child." Words seemed to fail him as he cupped her face in his hands. "I love you, both of you, so much." "We love you too," Emma whispered, covering his hands with her own. "More than I ever thought possible." As they stood together before the Christmas fire, wrapped in each other's arms with the promise of new life growing between them, Emma reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought her to this moment. She had journeyed west as a mail-order bride with no name of her own, seeking only security and the barest semblance of a home. Instead, she had found Daniel Abernathy, a man who had offered her his name freely, along with his heart, his home, and a love that grew stronger with each passing day. Summer arrived in a blaze of golden sunshine, painting the hills around Sunrise Ranch in vibrant green. The cattle grew fat on abundant grass, the gardens yielded a bounty of vegetables, and on a perfect June morning, Emma Abernathy gave birth to a healthy daughter. "She's beautiful," Daniel whispered, cradling the tiny bundle with awestruck gentleness. "Perfect, just like her mother." Exhausted but radiant, Emma watched her husband with their child, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain all she felt. "What shall we name her?" Daniel sat carefully on the edge of the bed, positioning himself so Emma could see their daughter's tiny face. "I was thinking Elizabeth, after my mother, but the choice is yours." "Elizabeth," Emma repeated, touching the downy head with gentle fingers. "Elizabeth Abernathy." "A strong name for a strong girl. With two strong parents to guide her," Daniel added, bending to kiss Emma's forehead. "Thank you for our daughter, for our family." Emma smiled up at him, remembering the lost young woman who had stepped off a train in Reading nearly a year before. "Thank you for giving me your name," she said softly. It was the first gift in a lifetime of giving. "The easiest gift I ever gave," Daniel replied, his blue eyes warm with love, "and the best decision I ever made." Outside the window, the sun climbed higher over Sunrise Ranch, bathing the land in golden light, a new day for the Abernathy family. Built on love that had begun with a simple offer from a kind-hearted cowboy to a mail-order bride left without a name.